Okay, HLers, we're in our second to last PowerPoint of the class, Lesson E5, the human brain. Here we go. IB would like you to be able to identify and recognize several structures in the brain. The medulla, the cerebellum, the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and the cerebral hemispheres. Let's draw our attention over to this X-ray, and let's start with the most primitive part of the body, which is the medulla oblongata. It sits right on top of the spine, and this is the area where heartbeat and respiration are regulated. Whether we're asleep or awake, it just happens automatically. Right above the medulla and to the right, we find the cerebellum. And the cerebellum is the area of the brain that is most involved in movement and motor coordination. Moving towards the front and center, we find the hypothalamus. H for hypothalamus, H for homeostasis. It is a regulator for homeostatic mechanisms such as the sleep-wake cycle, water balance, and many other variables which need to remain in balance and in sync with the rest of the body. Below the hypothalamus and connected to it, we find the pituitary gland. It's about the size of a pea. The pituitary and the hypothalamus are not technically part of the brain itself. They're located inside the brain cavity. And the pituitary gland is integral to growth and development, to the development of secondary sexual characteristics, and to the release and regulation of hormones. Moving to the colored sketch diagram, let's identify the different hemispheres or lobes of the brain. The very front of the brain is called the frontal lobe, which here is in blue. Right behind it is the parietal lobe. In the very, very back, pink, labeled the occipital lobe, which is where the visual cortex is for photoreception processing. And then underneath all of them, right above the cerebellum and the brainstem, is the temporal lobe. This slide shows written descriptions of the functions of the areas of the brain previously mentioned. Let's see how much you remember. Which structure in the brain is known to release hormones and be involved in sexual function and development of secondary sexual characteristics? That would be the pituitary gland. Which structure is involved in motor function and coordination? Cerebellum. And finally, what's the control center for automatic functions such as heartbeat and breathing? That's the medulla oblongata. How do we know what we know about the brain? How do we know which parts of the brain control which parts of the body? One of the best ways that we've used to determine this is by seeing what doesn't work in certain people and then scanning their brains using tools such as an fMRI to see if we can make a correlation between areas of the brain that look like they have lesions and problems in behavior and activity. In this picture, we see an MRI which is highlighting damaged brain tissue, i.e. lesions in the brain, and by mapping these out and performing tests on the patient, we can correlate areas of the brain with function. Moving on to animal experiments, and as always there are ethical issues associated with this, but what further research has done is has actually created or artificially put lesions into animal brains such as mice to sort of confirm our hypothesis or our correlational hypothesis that we've gotten from human data to say, oh, this part of the brain affects this part of the body. Aha, which brings us to the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. We're now aware of neurons and how they function, and sensory neurons and interneurons and motor neurons. But take all the neurons and nerve tissue in your body, and you can actually divide them into two functional categories: the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. One analogy used to describe these is an automobile analogy. The acceleration pedal in a car is similar to the sympathetic nervous system, and the brake pedal or deceleration pedal is connected or associated with a parasympathetic response. Sympathetic response, or acceleration of alertness and reaction and response in a fight or flight situation, is necessary when we need to respond to danger. So if we're on alert or if we perceive danger, the entire sympathetic nervous system will kick into gear, and it will do things like speed up the heart, dilate the iris, and reduce blood flow to the digestive system. Now, why is that? Because you only have a limited number of resources, and if you have to save yourself and run away from that saber-toothed tiger, it may not be the best time to sit down and have a big meal. So in the sympathetic response, fight or flight, breathing rate, heart rate, and whatnot are increased and revved up. And the one thing to know in the sympathetic response is that there is a decrease in digestive activity. Basically, the parasympathetic response is the exact opposite. When danger is perceived as dissipating, when there is a perception of being safe, the fight or flight response is not needed in that moment, and the body sort of calms down, winds down, and puts on the brakes, so to speak. So that's when your heartbeat slows down, that's when your iris will constrict from its previous dilation, and this is the point where blood flow will be redirected back to your digestive tract to maintain nutritional homeostasis. The sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems are antagonistic in nature. So when one is operating at a high level, the other is operating at a low level, and vice versa. They are in sync with each other. You can imagine it wouldn't be very healthy for a car if you pressed on the accelerator and the brake pedal at the same time. Needless to say, it's issues with sympathetic response and parasympathetic response. They can deal with stress. They can cause stress and all types of damage to the body. We don't often have opportunities where we're literally in mortal life danger, at least here in the United States, unless you're brave enough to volunteer for the military. However, we have social and societal stress. So a lot of times we are continually perceiving stressors in our environment and stimulating that sympathetic nervous system over and over and over again, when really we don't need it. It's sort of a residual response from our evolutionary development. And that causes wear and tear on the body. Stress breaks down the body. So a lot of relaxation response, de-stressing, exercise, meditation, yoga is meant to decrease the sympathetic response and increase the parasympathetic response of the body. Ever look at your eyes in a mirror in relatively low light and then turn the light on and keep looking at your eyes? What happens to the size of the pupil? It decreases. It decreases in response to the stimulus of the light. And if you try this several times, you'll discover that the pupil reflex is completely automatic, and it's not something that you can control. Your eye will automatically adjust to high light and low light situations. And because this is such an innate reflex, it is housed in one of the most primitive parts of our body, the medulla oblongata. This is why when we see medical drama shows and they bring critical patients into the ER, one of the very first things they do is move the eyelid up and shine a pen light onto the eyes. What exactly are they trying to determine? They're trying to determine if the pupil reflex is functioning. Because if it is not, that means that so many layers of the brain are shut down. The cerebrum, or thinking part of the brain, would shut down first. The cerebellum, motor coordination, would be second. And the third part of the brain, which would shut down last, would be the medulla oblongata, which takes care of breathing and heart rate and the pupil reflex. And if someone has a brain trauma or an injury such that you shine a light on their eyes and the pupils do not respond with the pupil reflex, that can be an indicator that brain death has occurred. Occasionally, you'll find a situation where there's head trauma to one side of the head, and you'll find that the pupil reflex is responsive on one side, but then you might hear the doctors say this left pupil is fixed and dilated, and that means there might be a specific trauma to one side of the brain. We've talked about different types of receptors in the nervous system, and we've talked about touch or mechanoreceptors in the skin. And certain mechanoreceptors are specifically sensitive to receiving signals which indicate pain. And what we see in this picture, embedded in the orange and yellow backdrop, is that sort of branching dendritic structure of the nerve endings that shows that if you put pressure on the skin, it is going to stimulate those nerve endings and you're going to feel pain. The next part of that, interestingly enough, is that your body, it's good for your body to feel pain because it's a warning bell that something's going on in an area and attention needs to be allocated to that situation. However, have you ever noticed that sometimes if you have like a really bad headache or if you have a terrible pain, that after a certain period of time the pain kind of dulls? And that's because once your body has been alerted and once you're in that amount of discomfort, it's really not beneficial for you to continually feel that pain. You're already aware of the problem. So your body actually can respond by triggering natural opiates in the body. And opiates are painkillers. One example of opiates are endorphins, and so when you get the rush of exercise or you feel like a high because you just did something really good or whatnot, you get this endorphin rush. And not only does that flush make us feel good, but it also numbs pain. Now, if you have chronic pain, some people suffer from migraines or some other type of chronic pain, maybe from arthritis. There's only a limit to the amount of natural opiates that your body can generate to combat that, and that's unfortunately one of the reasons why some people can become addicted to pain-killing drugs. That's the end of E5. We will combine this lesson with the next one, E6, for a combined E5, E6 quiz. Your last quiz in IB Biology for 2012.